Solved cold cases. Justice delivered after decades. Welcome back to Incident Insights, your go-to destination for unraveling the most chilling mysteries, unsolved crimes, and mind-boggling stories from around the world. Today, we're diving into 5 cold cases that were solved after years of mystery, with twists so shocking they sound like something straight out of a Hollywood movie. These cases remind us that justice might be delayed, but it's rarely denied. Before we get started, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our weekly deep dives into the world of true crime. Now, let's get into it. Our first case takes us back to 1994, to the quiet town of Springfield, Missouri. Mary Jo Bailey was a 26-year-old woman who was brutally murdered in her apartment. The crime scene was horrific. There were signs of a struggle, but no witnesses and no immediate suspects. Despite their best efforts, investigators hit a dead end. For decades, Mary Jo's family lived without answers. But in 2022, advancements in DNA technology finally cracked the case wide open. Investigators used a technique called genetic genealogy, which involves cross-referencing DNA found at crime scenes with public ancestry databases. This led them to Walter Leo Jackson Sr., a man with a history of violent crimes who had passed away in 2018. The twist? Walter had been living just 2 blocks away from Mary Jo at the time of her murder. He had even been questioned by police back in 1994, but was dismissed due to lack of evidence. It wasn't until nearly 3 decades later that science caught up with his crimes. While Walter didn't live to face justice, Mary Jo's family finally got the closure they deserved. Next, we turn to the baffling case of Angela Marie Maher, a 21-year-old college student whose life was tragically cut short in 1994 after being struck by a drunk driver in Florida. The driver, identified as Gloria Schulze, was initially arrested but managed to flee before her trial. For years, she seemed to vanish without a trace. Fast forward to 2009, when an anonymous tip led investigators to Canada, specifically Yellowknife, a remote town where Schulze had been living under a new identity for over a decade. Here's where things get even more bizarre. Schulze had built an entirely new life for herself as a community organizer and even had multiple run-ins with law enforcement for minor offenses like speeding and another DUI. The twist? None of these encounters flagged her as a fugitive because she'd successfully altered her identity. It wasn't until investigators re-examined her fingerprints from her original arrest that they confirmed her true identity. Schulze was extradited back to Florida and finally faced justice for Angela's death. A reminder that no matter how far you run or how well you hide, the truth has a way of catching up with you. Now let's talk about one of the most infamous cold cases in American history, the case of the Golden State Killer. Between 1974 and 1986, this unidentified predator committed at least 13 murders, over 50 rapes, and more than 100 burglaries across California. For decades, he eluded capture despite countless investigations and even public campaigns to identify him. The case took an incredible turn in 2018 when investigators used genetic genealogy, the same technique used in Mary Jo Bailey's case, to track down their suspect through familial DNA matches on public ancestry websites. The result? They identified Joseph James DeAngelo, a former police officer who had been living an unassuming life in suburban Sacramento. The twist here is chilling. DeAngelo had been hiding in plain sight for over 30 years, blending into his community as an ordinary neighbor and family man. When confronted by police during his arrest, he reportedly muttered to himself about an inner voice named Jerry who forced him to commit his crimes, a bizarre detail that added another layer of complexity to this already twisted case. DeAngelo eventually pled guilty to all charges and was sentenced to life in prison without parole, bringing long overdue justice to his many victims and their families. Before we move on to our next story, if you're enjoying this video so far and want more content like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us bring you deeper dives into true crime mysteries every week. And trust me, we've got some incredible stories lined up that you won't want to miss. Our fourth case is one of the oldest cold cases ever solved: the tragic kidnapping and murder of 7-year-old Maria Ridewolf in Sycamore, Illinois, back in 1957. Maria disappeared while playing outside with a friend on a snowy December evening. Her body was found months later in a nearby forest, but no suspects were ever charged. The case remained dormant until 2011, when Maria's childhood friend came forward with new information about a man named Jack McCullough, who had been seen near the playground on the night Maria vanished. Investigators reopened the case and discovered that McCullough, who had since changed his name, had lied about his alibi. Here's where it gets even more shocking. McCullough was convicted based largely on circumstantial evidence and witness testimony from over half a century earlier, a rare occurrence in criminal trials. While McCullough maintained his innocence and was eventually released due to procedural errors during his trial, Maria's case highlights how cold cases can resurface decades later with surprising twists. Our final story is about Dana Bradley, a 14-year-old girl from Newfoundland who was murdered while hitchhiking home in December 1981. Her body was found 4 days later in a wooded area outside St. John's, but despite extensive investigations and even public tips leading to potential suspects, no arrests were made for decades. In recent years, however, advances in forensic technology allowed investigators to re-examine old evidence, including hairs found at the crime scene, and link them to a suspect named David Pitchey, who had been living under an alias for years. Pitchey was arrested in 2020 after DNA evidence conclusively tied him to Dana's murder. The twist? Pitchey had been interviewed as part of the original investigation, but managed to avoid suspicion by providing false information about his whereabouts at the time of Dana's disappearance, a chilling reminder that killers can sometimes slip through the cracks even during thorough investigations. These 5 cases prove that time doesn't erase crimes, it only delays justice. Thanks to advancements in forensic science and relentless determination from investigators and families alike, these mysteries were finally solved after years or even decades of uncertainty. If you enjoyed today's video or learned something new, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you haven't already subscribed, what are you waiting for? Join our growing community as we continue uncovering some of the most fascinating stories from around the world. Thank you for watching Incident Insights. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.